My name is Alara, and for 5 long years, I have been a ghost. I lived in the silence between heartbeats, in the bitter aftertaste of my morning tea, wolfsbane, my salvation and my prison. It dulled my scent, muted the wolf within me, and turned my blood into something quiet and uninteresting. It kept me safe from the claiming ceremonies, from the alphas who saw omegas not as souls, but as property to be won. I thought my silence was a shield. I was wrong. It was the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, when my body betrayed me. The heat didn't creep in, it attacked. A wildfire ignited deep in my core, melting the ice I'd built around my heart, burning through every drop of poison in my veins. One moment I was grinding herbs, the next I was on my knees, the mortar shattered on the floor. My wolf, she stirred. After years of forced slumber, she stretched, and her first thought was not a word, but a feeling, a pull, a direction. North. Terror, cold and sharp, cut through the fever. If I could feel this, so could every alpha for miles. And one of them was worse than all the others. Kalen, the Alpha King. His name alone was a winter storm, beautiful, brutal, and utterly unforgiving. My wolf had whimpered at his distant scent once, years ago, a foolish, traitorous sound I'd silenced with a double dose of bitter tea. I couldn't stay. My scent was now a beacon, a glowing path in the dark straight to my doorstep. I threw on my cloak and ran into the blizzard. The cold was a physical slap, but it did nothing against the furnace inside me. I ran until my lungs screamed, until the world was nothing but whirling white and the desperate drum of my heart. I had no plan, only a primal need to get away. That's when I saw it. A structure looming out of the storm, darker than the night itself. A hunting lodge, grand and imposing, built of stone and ancient timber. A place of power. Every sane instinct screamed to avoid it, but my legs were failing. The heat was a clawed beast raking my insides, and the blinding snow offered no other shelter. The door was unlocked. I stumbled inside, collapsing on a thick fur rug as the storm door slammed shut behind me, sealing me in. The air was still, warm, and smelled of pine smoke and old leather. And something else, something beneath it all, a scent that made my wolf sit up and whine, a scent of deep earth, cold starlight, and undeniable, terrifying strength. It was everywhere. This was his place, Kalen's. I was in the lion's den, and I was too weak to move. The silence was broken by the sound I dreaded most, the crunch of boots on frozen snow outside, steady and deliberate. The heavy iron handle turned. The door opened. He filled the doorway, a shadow carved from the storm itself. Snow dusted his broad shoulders and clung to his dark hair, braided back from a face that was all sharp angles and ruthless beauty. His eyes, they found me instantly. They were the color of thawing gold, and in the dim light, they glowed. They swept over my crumpled form, my heaving chest, my terrified eyes. And then his nostrils flared. The change in the room was instant. The air crackled, thickening with a tension so potent I could taste it, metal and lightning. He took one step inside, then another, closing the door softly behind him. He didn't speak. He just looked, as if he was seeing a mirage that might disappear. I tried to push myself back, but my arms trembled uselessly. "Stay away," I rasped, the words scraping my raw throat. "Please." He ignored my plea. His gaze locked on me with an intensity that stole my breath. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "Your eyes are dilated. Your pulse is racing in your throat. You ran through a blizzard in full heat to collapse on my floor." A muscle ticked in his jaw. That is the very definition of not fine. He was right, and the humiliation of being so utterly seen, so completely known in my weakest moment, brought hot tears to my eyes. I turned my face away. For a long moment, he was quiet. The only sounds were the howling wind and my ragged breathing. Then he spoke again, his voice softer. Alara. My name. On his lips. It felt like a spell, a claim. I flinched. How do you know my name? A strange, pained look crossed his features. I've known your name for 5 years, he said, each word weighted with something I couldn't decipher. Since the day you vanished from the borderlands, I've found your empty cabins. I've smelled the ghost of your scent on the wind, always just out of reach. His golden eyes held mine, refusing to let me look away. My heart hammered against my ribs. He'd been looking for me. Why? A king had no business with a missing defective Omega. You were chasing a ghost. She's gone. No. The word was final, absolute. No, she's right here, and she's terrified. He slowly, so slowly raised his hand, palm open and empty. I am not going to hurt you, Alara, but you cannot stay on the floor. Will you let me help you? Every lesson from my old life screamed to refuse. Alphas did not help. They took, they claimed, they broke. But the fever was a tidal wave pulling me under. The cold stone beneath me offered no comfort. And his eyes, in them, I saw no hunger for possession. I saw a stark, bewildering honesty and a loneliness so deep it mirrored my own. It was that loneliness that broke me. A single shaky tear traced a path through the grime on my cheek. I gave the smallest nod I could manage. He moved then, not with the swift aggression of an alpha, but with the deliberate care of someone handling something precious and fragile. One arm slid behind my shoulders, the other under my knees. He lifted me as if I weighed nothing, cradling me against a chest that was solid and warm. His scent enveloped me. Pine, frost, and that undeniable, ancient power. Instead of frightening me further, it somehow just grounded the chaos within me. He carried me to a large bed by the hearth and laid me down on soft furs. He didn't linger. He went to a basin, poured water, and returned with a damp cloth. The first touch of cool linen to my forehead was a mercy so profound I whimpered. He didn't speak as he tended me, gently wiping the sweat from my brow, my neck. His touch was clinical, respectful, never straying, never demanding. It was the kindest anyone had ever been to me. Why? I finally breathed, watching his concentrated face in the firelight. He didn't look up, his focus on the cloth. Why what? Why are you doing this? You're the Alpha King. You should have. I should have what? He asked, his voice low. Taken advantage of an Omega in distress? Added to the terror in your eyes? Now he did look at me, and the intensity there stole my breath. The crown I wear is heavy, Alara, but it does not compel me to be a monster. The confession hung in the air between us. The king was kneeling by his bed, tending to a stranger and calling himself a potential monster. Nothing in my life had prepared me for this. Exhaustion, deeper than the physical, pulled at me. The heat was still there, but it was banked, manageable under his steady, calm presence. My eyelids grew heavy. As I drifted on the edge of consciousness, I felt him shift. He didn't leave. He sat on the edge of the bed, a solid, silent guardian. His fingers, calloused and warm, brushed a strand of hair from my cheek. And then I heard it, a whisper so faint I thought I dreamed it, a voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. I finally found you. The words followed me down into the dark, more comforting and terrifying than the fever ever could, because the most dangerous trap is not the one you see coming. It's the one that feels like a sanctuary, offered by the last person in the world you should trust. And outside the lodge, hidden in the swirling snow, a pair of eyes that were not the king's watched the glowing window. A low, satisfied smile curled on a face marked with the sigil of the Frost Fang pack. The ghost had been found, and soon the Moonfire Omega would be theirs. I woke to the scent of wood smoke and the quiet crackle of a fire. For a disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. The bed was too soft, the furs too rich. Then memory rushed back. The blizzard, the heat, the lodge, Kaylin. I bolted upright, a gasp catching in my throat. The fever was still there, a low, constant hum beneath my skin, but the terrifying sharp edge was gone, blunted. I was alone in the large bed. Morning light, weak and pale, filtered through ice-encrusted windows, painting the main room of the lodge in shades of gray and gold. And then I saw him. He was seated in a large chair by the rekindled hearth, a silent silhouette against the flames. He wasn't looking at me. His profile was turned, his gaze fixed on the fire, as if reading secrets in the embers. He'd changed into a simple, dark tunic, his braid resting over one shoulder. In the quiet light, he didn't look like the terrifying Alpha King from stories. He looked tired, a deep, bone-weary kind of tired that no amount of sleep could fix. My movement caught his attention. His head turned slowly, and those gold eyes found me. There was no surprise in them, only a watchful calm. "You're awake," he stated, his voice a low rumble that filled the quiet space. "The fever broke an hour ago. You should drink this." He nodded toward a wooden cup on a small table beside the bed. Steam curled from it, carrying the scent of mint and something earthy, healing herbs, not poison. I looked from the cup to him, suspicion a tight knot in my chest. "It's not wolfsbane," he said, as if reading my mind. A hint of something bitter touched his mouth. "I had my healer prepare it. It will soothe the residual heat and replenish your strength. You've pushed your body to the limits." His words were factual, but the care behind them was disarming. Cautiously, I reached for the cup. The warmth seeped into my chilled fingers. I took a small sip. It was gentle, calming. I drank more, the liquid easing the soreness in my throat. "Thank you," I murmured, the words feeling foreign. He gave a slight nod, his attention returning to the fire. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the pop of a log. It wasn't hostile, but it was thick with unspoken questions. My questions screamed in my head. Why was he here? Why wasn't he in his palace? Why was he being like this? "You said you've been looking for me," I finally ventured, my voice barely above a whisper. "For 5 years. Why?" He didn't answer immediately. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and laced his fingers together. The firelight danced over the strong lines of his hands, over the faint scars that spoke of a life of battle. "The northern borderlands have always been restless," he began, his voice distant as if recounting a report. 5 winters ago, the patrols reported a series of abandoned dwellings, not attacked, just emptied, as if the occupants vanished into thin air. But in each one, they found the same thing. His eyes lifted to mine. The lingering, bitter scent of wolfsbane, and beneath it, the faintest whisper of something else, something pure, like the first frost on a silent lake. My breath hitched. He was describing my scent, the one I'd tried so hard to kill. "It became a puzzle," he continued, "a ghost story for my trackers. Who was this Omega strong enough to endure such poison, desperate enough to choose it? I started writing the borders myself. I found the little clearing where you foraged for mint. I found the stream where you washed your clothes." A muscle in his jaw tightened. "I found the cabin where you burned your old clothes, trying to erase any trace of who you'd been." He had seen the ruins of my life. The humiliation was acute, but so was a strange, aching vulnerability. He had been a silent witness to my struggle. "It became more than a puzzle," he said, his voice dropping. "It became a habit, a quiet hope in a very loud, very lonely life. The idea that somewhere out there, someone understood what it meant to be utterly alone." He finally looked at me directly, and the raw honesty in his gaze was a physical blow. The crown is his solitary weight. It commands obedience, it demands strength, but it offers no companionship. My wolf, she howled for a phantom, for a scent on the wind. I started to believe I'd imagined you, a fantasy conjured by a king with too much power and too little heart. Tears pricked my eyes again. I understood that loneliness. I had lived inside it. To hear it echoed from a king, from this man of unimaginable power, shattered every preconception I held. I wasn't a fantasy, I whispered. No, he agreed softly. You were a survivor, and last night the storm brought you to my door, not as a subject to a king, but as one lost soul to another. He stood then, unfolding his powerful frame. He didn't approach the bed. He walked to the window, looking out at the snow-blanketed world. My healer will be here soon. He will check on you discreetly. No one else knows you are here. What happens now? The question slipped out, laden with all my fear. He turned, his expression unreadable. Now you rest, you heal, you are under my protection. When you are strong enough, we will talk about what you want, where you want to go. He said the words, but a shadow passed behind his eyes, a possessiveness so instinctual it flickered despite his clear effort to control it. The kindness was real, the loneliness was real, but the alpha beneath the crown was real too, and he had just found what he'd been searching for 5 years. Letting go would not be in his nature. A firm knock sounded at the lodge's heavy door. Kalen's posture shifted instantly, the weary man replaced by the formidable king. That will be Halvar, my healer, he said. Remember, you are safe. But as he moved to open the door, the seed of doubt took root. Was I safe, or had I simply exchanged one gilded cage for a more dangerous one? The man who spoke of loneliness had also tracked me for years, and kindness, I had learned, was often the most effective trap of all. The healer, Halvar, was an older man with eyes like chips of flint and hands that were surprisingly gentle. He examined me with a quiet efficiency, asking few questions, his expression giving nothing away. He checked the fading fever, the pulse in my wrist, the clarity of my eyes. Kalen stood sentinel by the fireplace, a silent, imposing presence that made the room feel smaller. The wolfsbane has done deep damage, Halvar announced, his voice gravelly. Your system is purging it, which is causing the residual waves of heat. It will take time. You must eat simple broths, restorative teas. He mixed a new powder into a cup of water and handed it to me. This will help. I drank it, trusting Kalen's implicit trust in this man. As I handed the empty cup back, Halvar's fingers brushed mine. He paused, his flinty eyes sharpening. He held my gaze for a beat too long, then turned to his bag, pulling out a small silver lancet. A final test, he said, his tone neutral, to ensure no toxicity remains in the blood. Kalen gave a curt nod. Halvar took my hand and with a quick, precise motion, pricked my fingertip. A single, perfect drop of blood welled up. He caught it on a smooth black stone he held in his palm. He muttered something under his breath, an old tongue that raised the hairs on my arms. He stared at the stone, waiting. For a moment, nothing. Then the drop of blood began to glow, not a reflection of the fire, but an internal, luminous light. It shifted from a deep crimson to a brilliant, shimmering silver. Tiny flecks of gold danced within it, like captured starlight. Halvar's breath left him in a sharp hiss. He stumbled back a step, the stone nearly slipping from his grasp. His face, previously impassive, was a mask of stunned disbelief. "By the old gods," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It cannot be." "What?" Kalen's command cut through the room in an instant. He was at Halvar's side in an instant. "What is it?" Halvar looked from the stone to me, his eyes wide with something like reverence and terror. "Moonfire," he breathed. The word hung in the air, dense and portentous. I had no idea what it meant, but the sound of it sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with fever. Explain. Kalen's voice was dangerously quiet. The Moonfire lineage, it was thought extinct, my king, a tale from the oldest histories. Halvar clutched the stone, his knuckles white. Omegas born under a rare celestial alignment. Their essence is pure lunar energy. Their blood doesn't just signify life, it signifies power. He looked at me with awe. A bond with a Moonfire Omega doesn't just unite souls, it amplifies an alpha's innate strength exponentially. It can bring stability to a realm, fertility to a bloodline. It can forge legends. The room seemed to tilt. I wasn't a person. I was a battery, a key to power. The freedom I had just begun to taste turned to ashes in my mouth. Kalen's reaction was not what I expected. There was no avaricious gleam in his eye, no calculating shift in his posture. Instead, a storm cloud of fury gathered on his face. He snatched the black stone from Halvar's hand and stared at the now fading silver glow. "This stays between us," Kalen said, each word like a chip of ice. "You will speak of this to no one, not to the council, not to your apprentices, not in your sleep. Do you understand me, Halvar? If the word Moonfire leaves your lips, I will consider it treason." Halvar bowed deeply, his old back creaking. "On my life, your majesty, the secret is kept. Leave us." The healer gathered his belongings with hurried, nervous motions and almost fled the lodge. The door clicked shut, leaving a silence so profound I could hear the frantic drum of my own heart. Kalen stood frozen, the stone clutched in his fist. He was breathing hard, his broad shoulders tense. He looked anguished. "Is that why?" I asked, my voice small and broken. "Is that why you searched for me? Did you know?" He turned to me, and the raw pain in his eyes was unmistakable. "No," he said, the word ripped from him. "Gods, Elara, no. I searched for the ghost in the borderlands, for the survivor. I had no idea." He threw the stone into the fire. It sparked and sizzled. "This changes nothing, and it changes everything." He strode to the bed, but stopped a few feet away, as if afraid to come closer. "This information, in the wrong hands, would make you a target for every ambitious alpha, every rival kingdom. You would never know peace. You would be hunted, fought over, traded like a sacred relic." His golden eyes burned into mine. "I will not let that happen. You are not a thing to be used. You are Elara, the woman who outran her fate for 5 years." He meant it. The ferocity of his protectiveness was a tangible force in the room. But it also sealed my fate in a new way. My secret was now our secret, binding me to him irrevocably. There could be no walking away now. The world outside this lodge had just become infinitely more dangerous. "What do we do?" I whispered, the "we" slipping out unbidden. The fury in his eyes softened into a grim determination. "We hide you in plain sight," he said. "When you are recovered, you will return with me to the palace, not as a mystery, but as a ward I found displaced by the storm, a noble's daughter from a distant, fallen pack. We will craft a story, a history. You will be under my protection, close enough to guard, but with a public identity that draws no extraordinary attention." It was a plan, a dangerous, elaborate lie, but it was a lifeline. "And you," I asked, "you know what I am, what it could mean for your power." For the first time since Halvar's revelation, Kalen's mouth quirked in a hint of his earlier bitter smile. "My power is sufficient, Elara. I wear the crown because I can bear its weight, not because I need a legend to prop me up." His gaze grew intense. "My priority is your safety, not an amplification, your safety. Do you believe me?" I looked at this king, who had confessed his loneliness, who was furious at a secret that could benefit him, who was now weaving a complex web just to give me a semblance of normalcy. The fear was still there, a constant companion. But beneath it, a new fragile emotion was taking root. Trust. "I believe you," I said. It was a leap into the unknown, but from the moment I ran into the storm, all my choices had been leaps. This one, for the first time, felt like it might lead to solid ground. He turned then, his face etched in moonlight and shadow. His eyes searched mine, seeing the raw need there. He wrestled with his instincts, the king warring with the man who understood solitude. With a slow exhale, he nodded. 1 hour. Stay within the sound of the lodge's bell. I will ring it if there is any danger. The gratitude that flooded me was overwhelming. I didn't wait. I stepped off the porch into the deep snow, the cold a welcome shock. I let go. The shift was smoother this time, a flowing change rather than a break. My bones realigned, fur, silver and luminous in the moonlight, sprang from my skin. I landed on 4 paws, the world exploding into a tapestry of intense scent and sound. I was the Moonfire Wolf, strong, swift, and free. I took off into the trees, a streak of living moonlight. It was euphoria. The snow flew beneath my paws. I leapt over fallen logs, my senses singing. For a short while, I forgot about kings and secrets and wars. I was just a wolf, running under her moon. I had circled back towards the lodge, my hour nearly up, when I caught it, a foreign scent, sharp and acrid, cutting through the clean snow pine. It was masked with wolfsbane, just as mine once was, but beneath it was the unmistakable, oily signature of the Frostfang pack. My hackles rose. I froze, lowering my body into the snow behind a thicket. There, near the tree line, a scout crouched. He was looking directly at the lodge, a crude map in his hands. He hadn't seen me. Rage, cold and clear, washed over me. This was my temporary sanctuary, Kalen's space, and they were watching it, marking it, planning. My first instinct was to attack, to defend, but Kalen's warning echoed in my mind. Trust no one. The walls have ears. If I was seen, if my unique wolf form was reported, the consequences would be catastrophic. I was not just Ilara anymore. I was a secret that could start a war. I forced myself to back away, silent as the falling snow. I retreated into the deeper shadows, my heart pounding, not from the run, but from fear and fury. I had to get back. I had to warn Kalen. As I turned, my paw caught on a hidden root. A small branch snapped. The scout's head whipped around. His eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, scanned the forest. They passed over my hiding spot, paused, and narrowed. He'd heard. He began to move toward me, his stance predatory, his shift beginning to ripple under his skin. I was out of time. I had to run. Now. I exploded from the thicket, not towards the lodge, but away from it, leading the threat away from Kalen. The scout, now fully shifted into a grizzled, brown-furred wolf, let out a low snarl of surprise and gave chase. The euphoria of my run was gone, replaced by the sharp, metallic taste of panic. I was fast. My Moonfire form was built for grace and speed, but he was heavier, more brutal, driven by a hunter's purpose. He knew these woods, using the terrain to cut me off, forcing me into a narrowing gully. I could hear the heavy bell of the lodge in my mind. I needed to ring it to bring Kalen, but the scout was herding me away, deeper into the wilderness. The full moon shone down, making my silver pelt a glowing beacon. I was a lighthouse in the dark, and I was leading a predator straight to me. Think, Ilara. I couldn't outmuscle him. I had to outsmart him. I remembered a stream Kalen had pointed out on a map during one of our lessons. It cut through a ravine with high, slippery walls. If I could get there. I put on a burst of speed, feigning a stumble to make him commit to a direction, then pivoted sharply. I darted between 2 close-growing pines, branches whipping at my face. He crashed through behind me, slowed for a crucial second. It was all I needed. I found the stream, a ribbon of black ice in the moonlight. I didn't hesitate. I leapt down the shallow bank and sprinted along the frozen water, the slick surface hindering my pursuer more than me. At a bend, I saw my chance. A tangled mass of fallen trees created a natural bridge to the higher bank. I scrambled up. The scout tried to follow, but his heavier weight broke through the rotten wood. He yelped, one leg plunging into the icy water below the ice, trapped in the submerged branches. This was my moment. I didn't look back. I ran as I had never run before, my lungs burning, back towards the lodge. I could no longer hear pursuit. I burst into the clearing just as the door of the lodge flew open. Kalen stood there, a silhouette of pure tension. He was in human form, but power radiated from him like heat from a forge. His eyes locked on me, taking in my heaving sides, the wild fear in my wolfish eyes. "Ilara?" His voice was a growl. I shifted, the change rushed and painful. I stumbled, collapsing to my knees in the snow. "Scout! Frostfang! In the woods! By the eastern stream! He's trapped!" Kalen didn't waste a second. He didn't shift. He simply turned his head toward the dark forest and roared. It wasn't a human sound. It was the primal command of an alpha king, amplified by the land itself. The very air vibrated with it. Trees shuddered, sending snow cascading from their branches. In the distance, I heard a panicked, answering yelp, then the frantic sounds of struggle and flight. Kalen had just announced his presence with a force that felt like a natural disaster. No scout, trapped or not, would dare remain. He was at my side in an instant, his hands on my shoulders checking me for injury. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" I shook my head, still trembling. "No, I led him to the ravine. He fell through the ice." A flicker of something fierce and approving crossed his face, quickly replaced with concern. He stripped off his own cloak and wrapped it around my shoulders, lifting me easily into his arms. He carried me back inside, kicking the door shut behind him. He placed me by the fire, stoking it to a blaze, and fetched a fur around my shoulders. He didn't speak until the violent shivering began to subside. "You were seen," his words heavy. "I think only as a wolf, a silver wolf. I don't think he had time to understand what he was seeing before he gave chase. And then you roared." "He will report a silver omega wolf in the king's territory," Kalen stated before the hearth. His mind was already racing ahead, strategizing. "Vorlin is cunning, but not learned in the old lore. He will see it as a curiosity, a prize, not as moonfire. But it confirms your presence here. Our departure tomorrow is no longer a precaution. It is a necessity." He stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You led him away from the lodge. You used the terrain against him. You were brave and reckless." The last word was not a condemnation, but a statement of fact laden with worry. "I couldn't let him get closer to you. I couldn't risk him finding out about us, about me." The word us hung in the air. Kalen's intense gaze softened just for a moment. He knelt in front of me, so we were eye level. "Listen to me, Ilara. Your safety is paramount, not mine. If there is ever a choice, you run, you hide, you let them come for me. My crown and my claws can handle Vorlin and 100 like him. You are the secret we must protect." He was asking me to prioritize my life over his. A king asking his subject to let him be a shield. It turned every hierarchy I knew on its head. "I can't promise that. Not if you're in danger because of me." A strange, conflicted smile touched his lips. "Stubborn survivor," he murmured, almost to himself. He stood. "Get some rest. We leave at dawn. The game has begun and the Frostfang has made its first move. Tomorrow, we move our piece to the heart of the board." As I lay down, the adrenaline fading into exhaustion, I realized something had shifted. The trust between us was no longer fragile. It had been tempered in the cold fear of the forest. He had trusted me to run free. I had trusted him with the consequence. We were allies now, bound by a secret and a shared enemy. But as I drifted to sleep, the image of the scout's narrowed, curious eyes haunted me. He had seen the silver wolf, and in the world of wolves, curiosity was often the first step toward obsession. Vorlin would be coming. It was no longer a question of if, but when. The journey to Stone Peak Garrison was a silent, swift march through a world of white. Kalen rode at the head of a column of elite guards, his bearing every inch the king. I traveled in a covered sleigh, hidden from view, the fictional Elara of Silverwood already beginning her performance of fragility and displacement. Through a small slit in the curtain, I watched the landscape change from dense forest to stark, rolling highlands. And then I saw it. Stone Peak wasn't a garrison. It was a mountain turned into a fortress. It rose from the snowy plains like a jagged black tooth, walls carved from the living rock, banners snapping in the bitter wind. It was imposing, cold, and utterly unyielding. My heart sank. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was the most formidable cage I could imagine. We passed through gates thicker than ancient trees, into a courtyard teeming with orderly chaos. Soldiers in gray and black liveries snapped to attention. Blacksmiths' hammers rang on steel. The air smelled of forge fire, hoarse and packed smell. And everywhere, eyes, curious, assessing, suspicious eyes, all turning toward the king's sleigh, wondering about its hidden passenger. Kalen dismounted and came to the sleigh door himself, a calculated gesture of care. He offered his hand. "Lady Elara," he said, his voice formal and loud enough to carry. "Welcome to Stone Peak. You are under the protection of the crown." I placed my hand in his, feeling the calloused strength, and stepped out. I kept my gaze downcast, the picture of a traumatized, sheltered Omega. A murmur rippled through the nearest soldiers. I was dressed in simple, good-quality traveling clothes provided by Kalen, my silver hair braided plainly. I looked the part. "Commander Rylan," Kalen called. A tall, severe man with a scar across his cheek stepped forward and saluted. "Lady Elara is a ward of the crown. Her family, the Silverwood line, was lost to raiders. She is to have chambers in the royal wing and a guard detail at all times. Her safety is your personal responsibility." Commander Ryland's sharp eyes flicked over me, missing nothing. "Understood, Your Majesty." His voice was like gravel. "She will be safe." As Kalen led me through labyrinthine stone corridors, the weight of the fortress pressed in. The ceilings were high and vaulted, swallowing sound. Our footsteps echoed like heartbeats. We passed armed sentries at every turn. Finally, we reached a heavy oak door. Inside was a spacious suite, a main room with a fireplace, a bedroom, and a small bathing chamber. It was well appointed but austere. The window offered a breathtaking, dizzying view of the frozen plains far below. There was no escape from this height. Once the door closed, leaving us alone with the crackling new fire, the formal masks dropped. Kalen's shoulders lost some of their rigid set. "These are your rooms," he said, his voice returning to its normal, quieter rumble. "Rylan is loyal, but do not mistake his protection for friendship. He follows orders. The same goes for everyone here. The story is holding, but Stone Peak is a place of soldiers. They respect strength, and they are wary of unknowns. You are an unknown." I walked to the window, hugging myself. It feels like a prison. It is the most secure location in the north. The walls are your shield, but within them you must be vigilant. You will take meals here or with me. You will not wander alone. You will be expected at the high table for the evening meal tonight. It is a formality, but an important one. You must be seen as my ward, nothing more, nothing less. The thought of facing a hall full of hardened warriors and curious officials made my stomach clench. And what if I make a mistake? What if someone recognizes that the Silverwood story is a lie? 10, we adapt, he said, his gaze steady on the horizon. But you are strong, Elara. You have been acting a part to survive for 5 years. This is just a different stage. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Rest. I will send a servant with appropriate attire for tonight. Remember, you are not alone here." But when the heavy door thudded shut, the silence that followed was profound and isolating. I was alone, in a stone fortress surrounded by strangers, with a lie perched on my tongue and a secret glowing in my blood. The loneliness of the borderlands was vast and empty. The loneliness of Stone Peak was crowded and watchful. It was in every way worse. That evening, a servant arrived with a deep blue gown, simple but elegant. As I dressed, I practiced the story in my head. Silverwood, Riverglen, Pine Scent, all gone. Kalen came to escort me himself. Seeing me in the gown, he stopped for a fraction of a second, a strange, unreadable emotion in his eyes before it was banked behind regal neutrality. He offered his arm. The great hall of Stone Peak was a cavern of noise and smoke. Long tables were packed with warriors, their laughter booming off the stone. At the high table sat Commander Rylan, other officers, and a few well-dressed individuals who were clearly not soldiers, courtiers, advisors. Every conversation died as we entered, hundreds of eyes fixed on us. The weight of their collective gaze was a physical pressure. Kalen guided me to the seat beside his at the center of the high table. I sat, keeping my posture straight, my hands folded in my lap. The meal began. I picked at my food, my appetite gone. I answered polite, probing questions from a courtier named Tavish, with soft, vague replies about my tragic past, sticking rigidly to the script. I felt like a mouse surrounded by wolves, all pretending not to be hungry. Then, from down the table, a woman's voice, cool and clear as a mountain spring, cut through the din. "Lady Alara, such a remarkable color to your hair, almost luminous. I don't believe I've ever seen a Silverwood with hair like winter moonlight before." All eyes swung to the speaker. She was beautiful, with raven dark hair and eyes of glacial green. She wore a dress of forest green velvet, and she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. This, I knew instinctively, was Lady Seraphine, a noble from a powerful allied pack, rumored to have hoped for a queen's crown herself. The trap was laid, sweet and subtle. My silver hair was my most obvious, unexplainable feature. Before I could stammer a reply, Kalen spoke. His voice was calm, conversational, but it carried an undercurrent that silenced the hall. The Silverwood line was ancient, Lady Seraphine, with ties to the first wolves. Traits long dormant sometimes reemerge in times of great trial. He took a sip of wine, his golden eyes meeting hers with a look that was both a reminder and a warning. A testament to their resilience, don't you think? The challenge hung in the air. Seraphine's smile tightened, but she dipped her head. "Indeed, Your Majesty, a testament." The meal continued, but the atmosphere had changed. An alliance had been declared, Kalen's with me, and a rival had revealed herself. I had navigated my first test only because the king had stepped in. I was safe for now, but as I sat there feeling Seraphine's icy gaze on me from across the table, I understood. The walls of Stone Peak were not just to keep Frostfang out, they were to keep the vipers inside contained, and I had just been dropped into their nest. Life in Stone Peak settled into a tense rhythm. My world was a small circuit, my chambers, the royal library, always with a guard, and the evening meal in the great hall. Kalen was often absent, dealing with the growing Frostfang threat at the border. His brief checks on me were our only contact, moments of quiet reality in the exhausting performance. Lady Seraphine, I learned, was the daughter of a key ally, Lord Boren. Her presence was a political necessity, but her ambition was a personal thorn. She watched me. She asked innocent-seeming questions that always had a sharp edge. "Do you miss the forests of Silverwood, my lady? It must be so different from the sophistication of court life you're doubtless accustomed to." A question designed to trip me up, to reveal my rough edges. I learned to parry with bland courtesy. "All homes are missed, Lady Seraphine, but I am grateful for His Majesty's protection." The library became my refuge. It was there, amidst dusty scrolls and ancient histories, that I went looking for my own truth. I needed to understand what moonfire meant. Using careful, casual inquiries to the elderly librarian, I found fragments. Old tales of Omegas who shone with an inner light, whose bonds brought an age of golden strength. Prophecies whispered of a moon fire rising during a time of fracturing ice to reforge the crown. The references were obscure, poetic, and terrifying. They spoke of me as a tool, a linchpin in a destiny I never chose. One afternoon, deep in a crumbling text, I found it, an illustration, faded but clear, a wolf with a pelt of shimmering silver standing before a king on a fractured throne, light streaming from her to him, mending the break. The caption read, "The moon fire's bond, salvation or scourge, for the light that mends can also blind." A shadow fell over the page. I gasped, slamming the book shut. Commander Ryland stood beside the table, his expression unreadable. "Old tales, my lady," he said, his gravelly voice neutral. "Superstition and song. Not much use for the realities of border defense." "My family enjoyed the old stories," I said quickly, heart pounding. Had he seen? His sharp eyes lingered on the closed book. "His Majesty has requested your presence in the war room, an educational opportunity for his ward." This was unprecedented. The war room was the heart of Stone Peak's strategy. Why would he bring me there? Anxiety coiled in my gut as I followed Ryland through the secure inner corridors. The war room was a stark, circular chamber dominated by a massive stone table carved with a map of the Northern Territories. Kaelin stood with several commanders, including Ryland, and Lord Tavish. They were discussing troop movements, supply lines. The air was thick with tension. Kaelin glanced up as I entered. "Lady Alara, observe. It is important you understand the threats our kingdom faces." His tone was didactic, fitting for a king instructing a ward. But his eyes held a different message. Listen, learn. They were discussing Vorlon. Scouts reported Frostfang forces massing near a pass called the Glacial Shard. It was a perfect defensible bottleneck. "The shard is too narrow for a full assault," argued one commander. "He's baiting us, wants us to commit our forces there while he strikes elsewhere." "But if we ignore it and he takes the shard, he has a dagger pointed at our flank," countered Lord Tavish. The debate raged. Kaelin listened, his gaze fixed on the map. I stood silently by the door, but I was listening, truly listening. I looked at the carved mountains, the river valleys. I thought like the prey I had been for so long. Where would I strike? Not where the strength was, not at the obvious point. My eyes traced a faint, forgotten path on the map, a thin line skirting the mountains, labeled Old Miner's Trace. It was far from the Glacial Shard, poorly defended because it was considered impassable in deep winter. A memory surfaced, a trapper in the borderlands complaining that this winter's odd thaws had cleared the high avalanches on the old paths. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them, soft but clear in a lull in the argument. What if the threat isn't at the shard? All eyes turned to me. Lord Tavish looked amused. Commander Ryland's brow furrowed. Kaelin's expression was carefully blank. "Explain, Lady Alara." I swallowed, pointing a hesitant finger at the map. "The Old Miner's Trace. If the snowpack is unstable from the recent thaws, it might be traversable. It comes out here." My finger landed behind Stone Peak's main supply route. It wouldn't be for an army, but for a small, fast group to disrupt supplies, to sow chaos behind your lines. Silence. The commander stared. It was a scout's thought, a guerrilla's thought, not a royal ward's thought. Commander Ryland leaned over the map, his scarred face intent. "She's right," he grunted, surprise in his voice. "We've had reports of strange slide activity near there. We dismissed it." He looked at me, his earlier suspicion replaced by sharp reassessment. "How did you know?" I shrank back, reverting to my timid role. I spent much time alone in the woods after my family. You learn to see paths others miss." Kaelin's gaze on me was intense, glowing with the pride he couldn't voice. Commander Rylan, dispatch a scouting party to the Miner's Trace immediately. Double the guard on the supply convoy leaving at dawn. He gave the orders, his voice firm. The room burst into action. As the men dispersed, Kalen approached me. He said quietly, for my ears alone, "That was well seen, Alara. You have a strategist's mind. Never hide that." But as I left the war room, I saw Lady Seraphine standing in an alcove nearby. She had heard everything. Her glacial green eyes were no longer merely curious. They were calculating, sharp with a new, intense interest. She hadn't just seen a timid ward. She'd seen a woman who thought like a warrior, a woman who had the king's private ear. And in her world, that made me not just a curiosity, but a threat. The performance was getting harder, and the audience was starting to see cracks in the character I was playing. The scouting party returned 2 days later, bearing grim news. Signs of recent passage were found on the old Miner's Trace, wolf prints carefully obscured. Alara's insight had been correct. Vorlin was planning a covert strike. The garrison was thrown into a higher state of alert, and Commander Ryland's attitude towards me shifted perceptibly. There was a grudging respect in his nods now, though the watchfulness remained. The incident, however, had made me a focal point. I could no longer be the invisible, tragic ward. I was the one who had seen what seasoned commanders had missed. Whispers followed me in the corridors, sharp-eyed, unusual, lucky. Lady Seraphine's strategy changed accordingly. The subtle barbs ceased. Instead, she began a campaign of public, cloying friendship. She would seek me out in the library, bringing me interesting texts on noble lineages, clearly trying to trap me in a lie about Silverwood ancestry. She invited me for walks on the fortified battlements, always under the watchful eyes of guards and courtiers. "I feel we have gotten off on the wrong foot, Lady Alara," she said, one bitterly cold afternoon as we paced the high walls, the wind whipping our cloaks. "We are both women in a world of hardened men. We should be allies." "His Majesty has been most kind," I replied, sticking to my script, gazing out at the endless white. "His Majesty is a king," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "And kings have duties that transcend personal kindness. Alliances must be cemented. Bloodlines must be secured." She let the words hang. "A ward, no matter how insightful, is a temporary fixture. A queen is a permanent pillar of the realm." The message was clear. I was a passing fascination. She was the logical, political choice. She was trying to undermine my sense of belonging, to make me feel like an imposter who would soon be discarded. It was clever, and it worked a familiar cold fear into my heart. That evening, a formal gathering was held in the Great Hall, a feast to honor the commanders before they deployed to reinforce the borders. The hall was louder, more boisterous than usual. Kalen presided at the high table, his expression a mask of royal authority. I sat beside him, Seraphine on his other side, playing the gracious hostess. During a lull, Lord Tavish stood up, raising his cup. "A toast to the keen eyes that guard our flank, to Lady Alara of Silverwood." A roar of approval went up from the warriors. Cups were raised toward me. I froze, a flush of heat creeping up my neck. This was the last thing I wanted, attention. Kalen raised his own cup, a faint, approving smile on his lips. Indeed, to vigilance. As the toast subsided, Seraphine leaned toward Kalen, her voice a sweet murmur meant to carry. "Such a treasure you have found, Majesty. It reminds me of the old story my nurse told, of the lonely king who found a moon maiden in the woods, whose light made his kingdom whole again. Quite romantic." She laughed lightly, as if it were a charming fancy. But her words were a poison dart. Moon maiden. Too close. Far too close. I saw Kalen's knuckles whiten on his cup. His smile vanished. "It is a poor king who needs tales to secure his throne, Lady Seraphine," he said, his voice cold enough to freeze the wine in their cups. My kingdom stands on the strength of its people and the sharpness of its steel, not on fairy stories. The rebuff was public and brutal. Seraphine's perfect composure cracked for a second, revealing a flash of pure, venomous fury before she smoothed it over with a stiff smile. The tension at the high table became palpable. Later, as guards escorted me back to my chambers, I felt a creeping sense of dread. Seraphine was no longer just suspicious. She was making connections, and a scorned, ambitious woman with resources was more dangerous than any blunt force enemy. I entered my sitting room to find a small, velvet-lined box on the table. There was no note. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside, on a bed of black silk, lay a necklace. The pendant was a large, teardrop-shaped moonstone. It was undeniably beautiful, shimmering with a soft, internal light, but the chain was made of thick, dark silver links, heavy and cold. It looked less like jewelry and more like a delicate, beautiful collar. I knew who it was from. This was no gift. It was a message, a statement. I see what you are, and I can adorn you or I can cage you. I snapped the box shut, my heart hammering. The walls of Stone Peak felt like they were closing in. The external enemy was at the gates. The internal enemy was at the high table, giving me gifts. And the king who protected me was a storm I was increasingly afraid to be without. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I stood at the window, the moonstone box on the ledge, staring out at the moon. It was full and brilliant, bathing the world in the same silver light that lived in my veins. For the first time, I didn't just feel like a secret. I felt like a prize, fought over in a shadow war I never agreed to join. And the battle lines were no longer just outside. They were here, within these stone walls, wrapped in velvet and smiling lies. The moonstone necklace was a ghost in the room. I hid the box under a floorboard, but its presence was a constant, chilling hum in the back of my mind. Seraphine's public demeanor returned to one of cool politeness, but her eyes held a new, acquisitive glint. She was waiting. Kaelin, preoccupied with the escalating Frostfang movements, was a distant bastion. Our brief exchanges were focused on security, on my continued adherence to the story. The easy understanding we'd forged in the lodge was buried under layers of duty and watchful eyes. I missed it. I missed him, not the king, but the lonely man who'd spoken of phantoms. The strain of the double life began to wear on me. The timid Lady Alara mask felt heavier every day. My true self, the survivor, the strategist, the Moonfire Wolf, strained against the cage of pretense. It manifested in small rebellions. I spent more time in the library, not reading old tales, but studying military histories, treatises on terrain. I asked the cooks about supply yields, the stable masters about travel times in winter. I was gathering knowledge, building my own map of this world I was trapped in. Commander Rylan noticed. He began to seek my opinion on minor logistical matters, a gruff pretense that allowed him to tap into the sharp, observational mind he'd glimpsed. It was a dangerous game, but it felt real. It felt like using my own mind, not a borrowed one. One afternoon, Rylan found me reviewing a list of winter grain stores. "You have a head for numbers, my lady," he grunted, standing over my table. "It is just organizing, Commander. A simple task." I kept my voice meek. "Simple tasks win or lose wars," he said. He paused, as if weighing a decision. "The king rides out tomorrow, to the glacial shard to inspect the forward lines. He will be gone for 3 days." A cold fist clenched in my stomach. Kaelin was leaving Stone Peak, leaving me here? "He believes the main threat is there," Rylan continued, his voice low. "But you and we look at the miner's trace. I have doubled the patrols, but my gut is uneasy. The Frostfang moves in the shadows. The king's presence at the shard is a powerful symbol, but it also draws all eyes there." He looked at me directly. "Be extra vigilant while he is gone. Trust no one, not even pretty gifts."
He had seen the necklace, or at least suspected its nature. He was warning me. In his own rough way, Commander Ryland had become an unlikely, conditional ally. The news of Kalen's departure spread through Stone Peak like a winter chill. That evening, the farewell in the courtyard was a public spectacle. Kalen, in full armor, mounted his huge black warhorse. His commanders surrounded him. I stood on the steps with the other non-combatants, Seraphine, a graceful statue beside me. Kalen's gaze swept the crowd, landing on me. He gave a short, regal nod. Stone Peak is in capable hands. See to your duties. The words were for everyone, but his eyes held mine for a second longer. A silent command. Stay safe. Follow Rylan. Then he was gone, the thunder of hooves fading into the distance. The fortress felt instantly colder, emptier, and infinitely more dangerous. The first day passed quietly, too quietly. The tension was a wire stretched taut. On the second day, a blizzard blew in, howling around the stone towers, isolating us from the world. It was during the storm's height that the fracture came. A servant, a young girl who often brought my meals, came to my door, her face pale. "Lady Alara, you are requested in the lower archives. Commander Ryland said it's urgent. He found something about Silverwood." My heart stuttered. Silverwood? The lie. Had Ryland found proof? Was this a trap? But the girl seemed genuinely frightened, and Ryland had told me to trust him. Wrapping my cloak tightly around me, I followed her, my guard trailing a few steps behind. The archives were deep in the mountain's belly, a maze of cold, dusty corridors. The servant led me to a remote section, lit by a single guttering torch. "Commander," I called out. My voice echoed. The servant girl melted into the shadows. My guard stepped forward, his hand on his sword hilt. "My lady, this feels wrong. We should return." A figure stepped from behind a towering shelf. It wasn't Rylan. It was Seraphine. She was alone, her green eyes gleaming in the torchlight. There was no pretense of friendship now, only cold triumph. "Hello, Moonfire." The word was a death knell. I took a step back, my guard moving to stand between us. "Where is Commander Rylan?" my guard demanded. "Detained on a matter of security," Seraphine said smoothly. "A fabricated threat on the eastern wall. It will keep him busy for a while." She took a step closer. "Did you really think you could hide? A wolf that glows like a fallen star? The healer Halvar is loyal to his king, but his apprentice is loyal to gold and to the future queen." She knew everything. "My guard will take me back to my chambers now," I said, forcing authority into my voice. "Your guard?" Seraphine smiled. "Do you really believe Kalen would assign you a guard whose loyalty was solely to you? He serves the crown, and the crown's interests are flexible." I looked at the guard. His face was stony, conflicted, but he didn't move to intervene. "You have a choice," Seraphine said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Kalen sees you as a secret to be kept, a fragile thing to be protected. I see you for what you are. Power. Come with me. My father's alliance is strong. Together we can control the narrative. You can be more than a hidden treasure. You can be a queen maker. My queen." She was offering a partnership, a gilded cage of her own design, to betray Kalen. "No," I said, the word simple and final.
Her smile vanished. "Then you leave me no choice. If I cannot have your power by my side, I cannot let Kalen keep it for himself." She raised her voice. "Guards!" From the dark archways, 4 of her personal guards emerged, armed and grim. My own guard finally moved, drawing his sword, but the odds were impossible. "Take her," Seraphine commanded. "To the old ice cells. No one goes there in a blizzard. She'll simply disappear. A tragic accident. A ward who wandered off in the storm, overcome by her tragic past." This was it. The move in the Shadow War. not with armies, but with whispers and kidnappings in the dark. As the guards advanced, my fear crystallized into a sharp, clear point. I was not Lady Alara of Silverwood. I was Alara, the survivor, and I was done being prey. I met Seraphine's triumphant gaze, and for the first time, I let her see the fire in mine. "You mistake me," I said, my voice low and steady. "I am not something to be taken." Then I turned and I ran, not like a scared ward, but like a wolf who knew her territory. I plunged deeper into the labyrinthine archives, the shouts of pursuit echoing behind me. The blizzard raged outside, but a colder storm had just begun inside Stone Peak, and I was at the very center of it. The lower archives were a frozen, forgotten throat of the mountain. I ran by memory and desperation, the torchlight from my pursuers casting monstrous leaping shadows on the walls of packed ice and ancient stone. My breath came in ragged clouds. Seraphine's words echoed in my skull. "Kaelin sees you as a secret to be kept, a fragile thing." Was that all I was to him? A precious object in a vault? The doubt was a sharper pain than the cold. I found the passage I'd seen on an old map, a narrow, crumbling servant stair that led up to the abandoned watchtower on the western peak. It was a dead end, but it was high and it was remote. It would buy me time to think. I scrambled up the slick, uneven steps, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind me. They would search the lower levels first. I burst out into the tower, a small, circular room open to the elements on one side. The blizzard screamed through the stone arch, driving needles of ice into my skin. I was trapped, but I could see. I huddled against the inner wall, out of the direct blast, my mind racing. Seraphine had made her play. She would spin a tale of my disappearance. Without Kaelin here to counter it, her story might hold. I could be entombed in this ice, or worse, smuggled out to her father's forces. I had to get a message to Kaelin, but how? The storm grounded all ravens. Rylan was neutralized. I was alone. The bond, the fragile, silent thread that had connected us since the lodge. I'd felt his emotions flicker through it, his worry, his pride, his restraint. Could I use it? Not just to feel, but to call. It was a wild, desperate hope, but hope was all I had left. I closed my eyes, shutting out the howling wind. I reached inward, past the fear, past the performance, to the core of who I was, the survivor, the moonfire. I focused on the bond, not as a passive link, but as a lifeline. I poured every ounce of my will into it. Not words, but a raw, pulsing signal of pure, unadulterated terror and need, a scream down the soul-deep connection between us. "Kaelin!" I poured into it the cold of the cell, Seraphine's treachery, the isolation, the crushing fear. I sent it all, a torrent of distress, aimed like an arrow at the heart of the man 3 days' ride away. For a long moment, nothing, just the wind and my own shuddering breath. Had it worked? Was it just my imagination? Then it came. A jolt, violent and electric, that shuddered through the very core of my being. It wasn't a sound, but a sensation, a roar of pure, unbridled fury that wasn't my own. It vibrated in my bones, hot and primordial. Through the bond, I felt a wave of blistering rage, a protectiveness so savage it stole my breath, followed by a spike of desperate, lung-searing fear. His fear, for me. And then, clear as a bell in the chaos of the storm, a single commanding thought that was not my own slammed into my mind, carried on the crest of that emotional tsunami. "Hold, I am coming." He'd heard me. He was coming. A sob of relief tore from my throat. He wasn't just coming as a king to secure an asset. The emotion flooding the bond was personal, possessive, and terrified. I mattered. I mattered.
The connection faded to a low, urgent hum, a constant reminder that I was no longer alone. But the immediate danger remained. I heard boots on the stair. They had found me. I stood, brushing the ice from my cloak. The passive ward was gone. In her place stood the woman who'd outwitted a Frostfine scout. My fear was still there, but it was now a tool, sharpening my senses. The first guard appeared in the doorway. "There you are. Come quietly, my lady. No one needs to get hurt." I backed towards the open archway, the blizzard clawing at my back. "Stay back." He advanced. Two more filled the doorway behind him. I had one chance, the element of surprise. They expected a cowering Omega. As the lead guard reached for me, I didn't flinch away. I ducked under his arm, using his momentum to shove him hard toward the other two. They stumbled in a confused heap in the narrow doorway. It was a blockage, but a temporary one. I didn't wait. I turned and I did the unthinkable. I climbed onto the stone ledge of the open archway. The wind threatened to pluck me off. 100-foot drop into a raging blizzard lay below. "Are you mad?" a guard shouted. Maybe I was, but I'd survived worse than a storm, and I had a king's command to hold. I looked at the wall opposite the tower. It was the main fortress wall, maybe 15 feet away, an impossible leap. But between them, nearly invisible in the swirling snow, were the remnants of an old rope bridge, now just frayed cables in a few wooden slats swinging wildly. It was a death trap. It was also my only path. Taking a deep breath, I leapt into the screaming gale. My hands caught the frozen, rusted cable. Agony shot through my palms as skin tore. I swung wildly, my feet scrambling for purchase on a dangling slat. The cable groaned, sending a shower of ice and rust down into the void. The guards watched stunned from the tower. Hand over hand, blinded by snow, I inched across the gap. Every slip, every groan of the cable was a prayer. The bond in my chest hummed like a plucked wire, a constant, urgent rhythm. Hold, hold, hold. My feet finally found the solidity of the fortress wall's battlements. I hauled myself over the edge, collapsing onto the walkway, my hands bloody, my body shaking with adrenaline and cold. I was on the inner wall, near the garrison's main yard, but I was exposed. I had to get inside, to find somewhere to hide until Kaelin arrived. Pulling my hood up, I stumbled along the battlement, seeking a doorway. As I passed a sheltered alcove, I heard voices below, Seraphins sharp with anger. "Find her! She can't have gone far. Check the old storerooms, the smithies." I pressed against the stone, my heart hammering. Then, another voice, lower, calmer, Commander Rylan. "Lady Seraphin, my men are searching for Lady Alara, as per your concerning report that she is missing. But I must ask, what were your guards doing in the lower archives without my authorization?" A standoff. Rylan was pushing back, buying time. I slid down a deserted stairwell and into a shadowy corridor near the kitchens. I needed a place to disappear. I thought of the one place in Stone Peak that felt like it had been mine, however briefly, the Royal Library. Moving like a ghost, I slipped through the familiar halls, avoiding the main thoroughfares. I reached the library door. It was unlocked. I slipped inside, into the deep, silent darkness, the scent of old paper and dust, a strange comfort. I collapsed behind a large central table, pulling my knees to my chest. I was safe for a moment. I'd held, I'd run, I'd crossed an abyss. Now, I just had to wait and believe that the fury I'd felt through the bond, the king's storm of rage, would reach me before the icy scheming of a lady with a crown in her eyes. The blizzard raged outside, but inside me, a different storm was gathering, born of betrayal and answered by a promise. He was coming, And when Kaelin arrived, Stone Peak would learn the difference between a king who rules with politics and a king whose mate has been threatened.
The blizzard howled for another 12 hours, a white fury that sealed Stone Peak in a tomb of ice and wind. I stayed hidden in the library, curled in the deepest shadows behind a bookcase. The bond was a live wire in my chest, humming with a constant, low-grade vibration of rage and relentless motion. He was coming, driving himself and his men through the impossible storm. The feeling was both a comfort and a terror. What would he do when he arrived? I survived on melted snow and scraps of dried fruit I found in a scribe's desk. I slept in fits, my dreams full of swinging cables and Seraphine's cold, smiling face. Outside the library door, I could hear the fortress in an uproar, boots running, shouted orders, the occasional tense argument. Commander Ryland was conducting a very public, very thorough search for the missing ward. Seraphine's narrative was being challenged by the commander's stubborn efficiency. On the morning of the third day, the wind died as suddenly as it had begun. An eerie, heavy silence settled over the world. The storm had passed, and through the bond, the vibration sharpened, intensified, coiling into a focused, lethal point. He was close. I crept to a high library window, rubbing a patch clear of frost. The world below was a pristine, blinding white. And then I saw them, a dark line on the snowfield, moving with impossible speed. Not the column that had left. This was a smaller, harder group, riding as if the hell winds themselves chased them. At their head, a figure on a massive black horse, a cloak streaming behind him like a banner of night. Kaelin. He hadn't waited for the main force. He'd taken his personal guard and ridden through the blizzard. The gates groaned open. He didn't slow. He rode straight into the main yard, his horse skidding to a halt on the icy stones. He dismounted before the animal had fully stopped, his movements fluid and charged with deadly purpose. Even from this distance, I could feel the power radiating from him. This wasn't the weary king or the careful protector. This was the Alpha, and he was enraged. Commander Ryland was there to meet him, saluting. I saw Kaelin speak, his head angled down toward Ryland, his posture rigid. Then Kaelin's head lifted. His gaze didn't search the windows or the doors. It went unerringly, directly to the high library window where I stood. He couldn't possibly see me through the frosted glass, but he knew. The bond pulled taut between us, a guiding line. He turned and strode into the fortress, his guards falling into formation behind him. The hunt within Stone Peak had begun, and the king was the hunter. I shrank back from the window, my heart pounding. The moment of reckoning was here. I had to decide, stay hidden and let him tear the fortress apart, or go to him and face the consequences of the chaos I'd ignited. The bond made the decision for me. It pulled, insistent, a magnetic draw toward the epicenter of the storm. I was done hiding. I wrapped my cloak around my torn dress and bloodied hands and left the library. The corridors were strangely empty, the usual traffic hushed. The fortress held its breath. I followed the pull, descending toward the heart of Stone Peak, the great hall. As I approached the vast doors, I heard his voice. It wasn't a roar. It was quieter, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. You will bring Lady Seraphine to me, now. I pushed the door a crack open. The hall was empty, save for a few terrified servants cowering near the walls and a circle of Kaelin's travel-stained, grim-faced personal guard. Commander Ryland was standing at attention before him, and in the center of the space, Kaelin stood alone, having discarded his snow-caked cloak. He still wore his travel-stained leathers and armor, and he looked like a warrior king carved from winter itself. Seraphine entered from a side door, gliding forward with her head held high. She had changed into a gown of deep emerald, her hair perfect. She was the picture of composed nobility. "Your Majesty," she said, dipping into a graceful curtsy. "You returned with great haste. We were so worried."
Where is she? Kaelin's voice cut through her performance like a blade. Seraphin blinked, feigning confusion. My lord? Ilara. He took a single step forward. The air in the hall seemed to compress. My ward. You reported her missing. I am here to find her. Where is she? The blizzard, sire. Seraphin spread her hands, her voice laced with concern. The poor, distraught girl. The tragedy of her past. We fear she may have wandered into the storm. We have searched everywhere. Commander Ryland can attest. I do not require a performance, Kaelin said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. I require the truth, and you will give it to me. Here. Now. Seraphin's mask slipped, a flicker of fear, then defiance. You speak to me as if I am a criminal, Majesty. I am the daughter of Lord Boren, your strongest ally. My concern is for the safety of your ward. Your concern, Kaelin said, taking another slow, deliberate step, was to isolate, threaten, and attempt to abduct the woman under my protection. Your guards were deployed without Commander Ryland's knowledge. Your healer's apprentice has confessed secrets for your gold. You called her Moonfire in the lower archives. The color drained from Seraphin's face, her composure shattered. You have no proof. It is the word of a bought apprentice against mine. My father. Your father, Kaelin thundered, the sound finally breaking, echoing off the stone, will learn that your daughter conspired against her king and threatened what is mine. The word was a primal snarl, a claim that vibrated in the very stones. That is the only message he will receive. He was upon her then, not touching her, but his presence was a physical force that made her stumble back. You sought to use her, to control her power. You saw a tool. I see a woman. That is the difference between you ever wearing a crown and me holding one. It was a public annihilation. Seraphin stood trembling, stripped of all pretense, exposed as the schemer she was. Now, Kaelin said, turning his back on her as if she were already irrelevant, for the last time, where is Ilara? It was then that I pushed the door fully open and stepped into the hall. Every head turned, the guards straightened, Ryland's tense shoulders dropped a fraction. Seraphin's eyes widened with hate. And Kaelin, he turned and saw me. The fury on his face didn't vanish, but it transformed. It was overtaken by a wave of such profound, gut-wrenching relief that it staggered him. He took me in, the torn dress, the blood on my hands, the shadows under my eyes, the defiance and fear warring on my face. The bond between us flooded with a warmth so intense that melted the last of the ice in my veins. I walked toward him, my steps silent on the rush-drawn floor. I stopped a few feet away. I am here, I said, my voice clear in the silent hall. For a moment, he just looked at me, as if memorizing the fact of my safety. Then he closed the distance. His hands came up, not to grab, but to frame my face, his thumbs gently brushing the smudges of dirt on my cheeks. The touch was tender, reverent, and utterly possessive. A king's touch, and a mate's. You are hurt, he murmured, his eyes tracing the cuts on my palms. I held on, I whispered, just for him, and I ran. A ghost of a smile, fierce and proud, touched his lips. I know. I felt it. He lowered his forehead to mine, a brief, shocking moment of public intimacy that stole my breath. You are safe now. Then he turned, keeping one hand firmly on my shoulder, anchoring me to his side. He faced the hall, his expression settling back into ruthless authority. Lady Seraphin is to be confined to her chambers under guard. She will await my judgment. Commander Ryland, see to it. As guards moved to escort the shell-shocked Seraphin away, Kaelin's gaze swept the hall. Let it be known, his voice carried to every corner, that Ilara is under my protection, not as a ward, not as a secret. He paused, his grip on my shoulder tightening. She is my chosen, my equal, and any threat to her is a declaration of war against the crown. Is that understood?" The response was immediate. Every guard, every servant, even Commander Rylan, bowed their heads. The message was sent, not in whispers, but in a king's roar. The storm had arrived, and it had carved a new truth into the stone of Stonepeak. I was no longer a hidden treasure. I was a declared power, and the man beside me had just rewritten the rules for everyone to see. The days that followed were a whirlwind. With Seraphine confined and her network dismantled, Stonepeak exhaled a breath it had been holding for weeks. The atmosphere was no longer of suspicion, but of wary, focused order. The king's declaration had been unambiguous.
My wounds were treated by a chastened but loyal Halvar. I was given new chambers adjoining Kaelin's own, a sign of both protection and status. The fiction of Silverwood was officially laid to rest. I was simply Alara, the king's chosen. We didn't speak of the bond, of the moonfire of the future. There was no need. It hummed between us, a constant, quiet understanding. He was often in council, dealing with the fallout of Seraphine's plot and the ever-present Frostfang thread, but he made time for quiet meals, for walks along the battlements in the brittle sunshine. He asked for my thoughts on the Frostfang movements, truly listening. I was no longer just surviving his world. I was being consulted on it. One such evening, a week after his return, we stood on the highest tower, looking north toward the glacial shard. The air was sharp and still. "Vorlin is regrouping," Kaelin said, his gaze on the distant, jagged peaks. "Seraphine's folly delayed him. He lost his inside advantage, but he is not a man who accepts defeat. He will come, not with shadows and tricks this time, with force." "Then we meet him with force," I said, the words feeling natural, "and with strategy." He looked down at me, a softness in his golden eyes that was still a wonder to me. "We," he repeated, the word heavy with meaning. "You declared me your equal," I said, meeting his gaze. "I do not take that lightly. This kingdom is your responsibility, and if I am to stand beside you, it becomes mine as well. Not as a symbol, as a partner." He was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his cloak and pulled out a small object. It was the moonstone necklace. I flinched instinctively. "A symbol of a threat," he said, his voice low, "but it can be reforged into a symbol of something else." He held it out. "I cannot undo what you are, Alara. The moonfire is part of you, as your strength and your spirit are. I would not change it, for it brought you to me. But the world will know eventually. We must decide how." I took the cold stone, its inner light pulsing softly. "I don't want to be a weapon or a prize." "Then we will not present you as one," he said firmly. "We will present you as you are, the woman who sees paths others miss, the survivor who strengthens a king's resolve, the heart that makes a crown feel less like a weight and more like a purpose." His voice grew rough. "The bond we have, it is not about amplifying my power. It is about balancing it. Your light doesn't just make me stronger, it makes me better. It makes me remember why the crown is worth wearing." Tears blurred my vision. In all my years of hiding, I had never dreamed of being seen so completely and wanted so fiercely, not for what I could give, but for who I was. "What do we do?" I whispered. "We face the dawn, together." The Frostfang attack came with the first thaw. Vorlin, enraged and desperate, threw his main force at the glacial shard in a direct, brutal assault. He was counting on the narrow pass to bottleneck Kaelin's forces, but we were ready. Kaelin led the defense from the front, a formidable, inspiring figure, and I was not in a tower waiting. With Commander Ryland's grudging approval and a full contingent of guards,
I coordinated from the command post at Stone Peak, managing communications, tracking supply lines to the front, using my knowledge of the terrain to suggest flanking maneuvers. I was the steady hand at the center of the storm, and the bond kept me connected to Kaelin, a constant, steady stream of resolve and determination flowing between us. The battle was fierce but short. Kaelin's forces, prepared and well-led, broke the Frostfang assault. Vorlin himself was captured, his ambition shattered on the very mountains he sought to claim. In the aftermath, a great council was called at Stone Peak. All the Northern Pack alphas and elders were summoned, including a grim-faced Lord Bourne, Seraphine's father. The great hall was packed, the air thick with tension and the scent of victory. Kaelin stood before them all, crown gleaming, and I stood at his right hand, no longer in shadows, but in the light. Dressed in a silver-gray gown, the reforged moonstone now set in a simple, elegant pendant, resting at my throat. I was not hiding. "The Frostfang threat is ended," Kaelin announced, his voice ringing. "But this victory has revealed fractures within our own walls, fractures of ambition, of treachery." His gaze landed on Lord Bourne, who paled. "I will not tolerate schemers who prey on the vulnerable for power." Then he spoke of the future, of unity, of a kingdom built not just on strength, but on justice and loyalty. And then he turned to me. "This is Alara," he said, his voice softening only for me. "Many of you have heard whispers, lies, half-truths. Let me give you the truth. She is the bravest person I have ever known. She is my strategist, my conscience, and my heart. She is my chosen mate, and she will be your queen." He didn't speak of Moonfire. He didn't need to. He presented me as a woman of merit, of strength, of character. The light in my veins was irrelevant next to the light of his respect and love. One by one, the alphas knelt. Lord Bourne, after a moment of strained silence, knelt last, his head bowed in submission and shame. There was no grand coronation then. That would come later, in the spring in the capital. But in that moment, in the stark hall of the mountain fortress, a queen was recognized. Later, in the quiet of our adjoining chambers, the weight of the day settled upon me. Kaelin found me staring into the fire. "It is a lot," he said, coming to stand beside me. "It is everything, and nothing like I ever imagined." "Are you afraid?" I thought about it. "No," I said, realizing it was true. Not of the crown, not of the future. The only thing I was ever truly afraid of was being owned. And you have never made me feel owned. You have made me feel partnered." He turned me to face him, his hands warm on my arms. "Always," he vowed. "This path we walk side by side. The Moonfire in your blood is a part of you, a beautiful, powerful part, but it is not why I love you. I love you for the woman who defied fate, the wolf who crossed an abyss, the heart that called to mine across a blizzard." He leaned in, and for the first time, his lips met mine. It wasn't a kiss of heat or claiming, but of promise, a seal on the bond that had grown between us, a bond of trust, of respect, of shared strength and dawning profound love. It was gentle, and it was everything. When we parted, I rested my forehead against his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart, the heart of a king, the heart of my mate. "I spent so long hiding from my destiny. And now," he murmured into my hair. I looked up at him, at the man who had seen my ghost and chased it, who had fought his own instincts to offer me choice, who had ridden through a storm for me. I saw the lonely king, and I saw my future. "Now," I said, a smile blooming on my face for the first time in what felt like forever, "I am finally home." Outside, the long winter was giving way. The first fragile signs of spring whispered at the edges of the snow. In the hearth, the fire crackled, warm and bright, and in the quiet fortress, a king and his queen stood together, no longer haunted by phantoms, but illuminated by the dawn of their own making. The story of the ghost and the king was over. The story of the Moonfire Queen and her king had just begun.